Chanté Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me and a huge welcome to Thrive Solo. I'm genuinely excited to talk to you. I mean, I have been dying to talk to you. But before we get into our conversation, can you just tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Of course, and thank you for having me on.
You're
It's really
welcome.
funny because I actually listened to an interview that you did on
Did you?
someone else's podcast. Yeah, I'm gonna find, and it was like a couple weeks ago, and
Oh,
that's how I think I first came across you because I think I was already following you on Instagram,
oh,
and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing, and you were kind of talking about like being like in MI5 or whatever, and then like just
oh, in
all
the
this like
detective
the
thing.
detective, yeah, like all this stuff. And I was like, you are just the most fascinating, brilliant person. And like, I
Oh,
was so happy when I stumbled across you.
oh,
I just think you're amazing and so inspiring. So thank
oh
you for
my
having
God.
me on the podcast. And I just
Thank
think this is
you.
so like, because I was literally just listening to you, I'm gonna find the podcast. I think it was the woman who does like the love addiction podcast or something. Gonna try and
Well,
find
I'm
it.
just trying to remember whose podcast I've been on recently.
I don't think it was recent, I was in the archives.
Oh, really? God, I wonder what. I mean, I
Yeah,
have been on quite a few podcasts, but I'm just trying to think what it would be. But we'll find
we'll
it. We'll
find it.
find
We'll
it.
find it. But yeah, I
But thank you for being. I mean, how lovely of you to say. I really appreciate that. Thanks, love.
Oh yeah. So yeah, I'm Chanté. I am a writer, kind of doing a lot of like articles, speeches, opinion, that sort of stuff. And then I also do a bit of like content creation-y bits on social media. It's mainly just me trying to talk about the work that I'm writing, but in a social friendly way. And yeah, I run an event series called Strangers in the City, which is for people wherever they are to come solo and meet others and try a new activity. And we do like a bunch of crazy stuff from like, baking and bread making to jujitsu and improv. And it's just basically a way for you to discover the variety that your city has to offer, but you're also doing it with other people. And we kind of have a big rule where you have to come solo. So like you can't bring your friend or your boyfriend or whatever. Like everyone has to be on their own because we design the space to make sure it's like connection first and everyone has like an equal opportunity to meet others. So yeah, that is what I do.
It sounds Strange in the City sounds so cool. And actually it's
It's
on my
amazing.
list of things to ask you about. So we'll come back to this and then I want you to tell us all about the detail of it. But I'm going to save it for a bit later.
Of course.
Not least because then people will remember it at the end of the episode and then they'll remember to go and look it up. But I definitely will ask you about this at the end. But what I want to get straight into is the piece. You're probably so bored of being asked about this, but it's the piece that you wrote for British Vogue, must have been just over a month ago now, called Is Having a Boyfriend Embarrassing Now? Because this piece has gone fucking viral, and I'm dying to hear what the last few weeks have been like for you. But you know what is crazy is that, and to anyone who isn't aware of this piece, when I say this piece has gone viral, it really has gone viral. Like I've heard people talking about this piece, people with huge followings, people who are not single, people I've heard there was a podcaster called Lewis Howes. I don't know whether you know of him. He's got a podcast called The School of Greatness, which is a really big podcast. He's got, over 1 million followers and he gets millions and millions of listeners. He mentioned your piece the other day. So I've heard it mentioned by a lot of people that you perhaps wouldn't expect would have necessarily even wouldn't have even come into their consciousness. But I
Mm.
think it's amazing that it's gone so viral. But before we get into all of this, can you tell those listeners who haven't read this article what it's about and what motivated you to write it?
Yeah, so the article is having a boyfriend embarrassing now. I wrote that for Vogue. It came out 25th of October. So like it feels like a while ago now, but the conversation is still going on. And essentially I interviewed a whole bunch of women who are in relationships about why they kind of like hid their relationships and how they felt about the nature of their relationships. And I kind of noticed this trend on social media of people kind of like hiding or concealing their partners online in a way that they didn't do for any other person in their life. We see their mum, their dad, their siblings, their friends, their cousins, their pets, what they had for dinner. Everything else in their life was a fodder for social media. But for some reason, it was only our romantic relationships that people felt the need to be incredibly secretive about. And I really wanted to understand why that was. And I think a lot of people kind of chalk up to this idea of like, well, it's just privacy. But why is it that only that relationship is afforded privacy? And I wanted to understand, like, how is it that we feel about relationships that makes it something that we are less inclined to share with the world, like what is going on here, and how does that kind of speak to a culture of just relationship content or how we do relationships online anyway. And so I put this kind of call out on my Instagram, and I had quite a few followers at the time. I had like about 65,000 people, and so I put a call out on my Instagram, and I had so many responses. I was even away at the time. I was like in Lisbon, but instead of like enjoying the sunshine, I was like on my phone, like going back and forth with like just so many people,
And
because
was it
every time
people
I
in
do a call out,
relationships who were
yeah, yeah,
responding to this? Yeah.
yeah, because
Sorry,
I
just to
want,
clarify.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, specifically. Obviously I got like commentary from all people who had things to say and share, but it was mainly just people who were in relationships because I wanted to get their insight. And it kind of fell into these three brackets of, people who just said, it's just a privacy thing, it's just a privacy thing. And then others who are like, well, yes, it's about privacy, but also it's because I basically have this fear that if I show my partner online, they will betray me in some way and I will have to take down these pictures and I will feel embarrassed at the prospect of being, treated badly. And I don't want people to ask me what happened to this person. And I found that really interesting because it was this idea that even when we get into this relationship that is supposed to be this amazing thing, there is just still this wavering feeling that this person is going to betray me. And so my actions now have to reflect what I would do in that instance. So it's really weird how that sort of fear molds how we behave and how we perform or show our relationships in a way that none of our other relationships do that. Like your mother could betray you, your best friend could betray you, but you don't feel the need, like their betrayal of you doesn't feel like an indictment of you. Like it doesn't hit home. And then there were kind of people who were just like, well, having a boyfriend is just embarrassing. They were like, it's not part of the brand. And I don't want people to think that I am a kind of boyfriend girl or I'm a reflection of my partner or I just care about being in a relationship, whatever. Like that just feels really uncool. And I don't want to be that person. So I don't want anyone to ever know that I'm with someone. And they were just kind of like heavy on that. And obviously, I was talking to a lot of people whose jobs are to be on social media. And what does that mean when you're in a relationship and your job is being online? Like, how does that impact you? A lot of them were just like, I would never do it. The times I have shared my partner, I've lost a lot of followers, or people have just like not engaged with me, or they haven't enjoyed my content. And it's really shown me how we react to relationships online. I was looking at a lot of like women's podcasts and what do they say about it? And I was like talking about the Delusional Diaries podcast and how, these two girls, one of them is married and the other one's in a relationship, but they were like, when I meet a girl in a relationship, I just think she's boring. I don't want to be friends with a boyfriend girl. I don't think she's going to be entertaining. I don't think it's going to be fun. Da, 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 da. So it's just really, really interesting how we think and feel about relationships. And I think that piece covered, it wasn't even a long piece, but it just
Yeah.
encapsulated all of that. And people were just so invested in these stories and this idea. And I think a lot of people felt this way, but didn't want to say it. And so this piece became a way for them to have the conversation or share their thoughts without having to be the person to say the thing.
Yeah, I mean, it is absolutely fascinating to me how this was the reaction that you got. And let me ask, did these women tell you why they were feeling like this about not
Yeah.
showing their boyfriend? What reasons were they giving?
Yeah, a lot of it was about, okay, cool. I don't want this person to embarrass me and I don't want people to ask me about it. And I don't want to feel like someone who is like, oh, in a relationship and then they've changed. And then a lot of people kind of just felt like this, I don't want my relationship to be the thing that people know me as. Like, I fear that I'm going to lose my sense of identity in this relationship. And then people will only perceive me as someone's girlfriend, or
Mm.
people will kind of just like, there's this whole thing online at the moment, more so now with women talking about the horrible experiences they've had with men. And so I think the sort of like illusion of the fantasy of the romantic partnership is really fading away. And I think there was a fantasy there because there was an element of mystery. No one really wanted to talk about what was happening inside a relationship or what happened with someone they dated, but we only really want to show the highlight. And now you're having women come in line being like, that viral story of the girl who went on a date with a guy and he stole her shoes. No one is holding back anymore. And
Yeah.
so I think because of that, there definitely is this fear of like, when you see someone in a relationship online, it used to be like, oh, this is so cute. And now it's like, oh, I don't really know what's going on behind closed doors. I don't really want to speculate on this.
Yeah.
And because of that, I think a lot of people are more, I guess, reticent about about sharing their relationships online, because we just know now that, oh, you can't sell us this fantasy anymore. This isn't something that appeals to people. This isn't aspirational, because we
Yeah.
know too much about what happens behind closed doors. And so I think
This
that shaped people's perception.
this is what I find fascinating is that, and obviously look, I've been working in this, single space now for nearly 4 years, and I have most certainly been feeling, especially in the last year, I would say, that this movement, this sort of solo movement, is ramping up, maybe in the last sort of year and a half,
Yep.
particularly.
Yep.
And it is fascinating to me because, in the way that back in the day, and I think this is a good thing, like, because, like you say, women are wising up.
Hmm.
And because back in the day, it was like a relationship, a husband, a boyfriend was the kind of ultimate prize for a
Yep.
woman. Let's face it,
Yep.
since we were little girls, we've been being fed this idea and this expectation that we will get married and we will have babies. And particularly for women, that is where it's at. That is the ultimate, quote, ultimate success in life. That is what we are. That is our main aim. That is our goal. So
Hmm.
honestly, I just, and even what I find fascinating is, even though I particularly, because of the lens that I see life through, which is, having conversations about singlehood all the time and,
Hmm.
having emails from listeners, and I've got a membership and the podcast and all the rest of it, even though I've been watching this movement and feeling this movement happening over the last year or so, I still am gobsmacked that it is perhaps even bigger than I thought. And your piece has really spoken to that, because it's just showed how big this topic really is and how it really is beginning to come to the forefront, like more than ever before. I want to go more into relationships shortly, but what I want to ask you now is, tell me about the last few weeks in your life since this piece went live. What has it been like for you?
It's been insane for me. I feel like obviously this piece has really inspired, an already growing movement, like you've said. It's put a battery in people's back. It's making people feel good about themselves, but also it's making people very angry. And I've had to deal with the praise, but also like the vicious sort of takedown of me. And I've kind of been yeah, balancing these two kind of conflicting experiences. I've had a lot of trolling from men and women, a lot of nasty things said about me, to me, a lot of like quite like vicious, violent messages. Like, it's been very, very tough to deal with all of that. And I also think, before writing this piece, I kind of already had my feelings about my own singlehood and single identity. Like, it wasn't something that I didn't really obsess over it, but I was very passionate about, do you know what? I see the way the world tries to make single women feel about themselves. I see the way that people try to make me feel about myself, and I don't agree with what they're saying. So I was always very passionate about kind of talking about my experiences, and like, just leaning into the importance of a solo life, and, listening to people like yourself and your stories and feeling inspired by it. But it became very different when I was now like the heart of the story. I also had a lot of, younger women messaging me, which I really, really appreciate. And I think really moved me, because they were, obviously I'm 29, and these were like 18-year-olds, and they were just like, I've never had a boyfriend before. And I used to feel really bad about it and really insecure and really upset. And, I read your piece and I feel really good about myself now. And it was really interesting. And I was like, I didn't want to be, I didn't want to infantilize them, or I didn't want to be patronizing to them, but I wanted to just be like, you're so young and you just have this incredible life ahead of you, and you're so amazing, and you're going to experience so much and do so much. And, I really wanted to be encouraging of them. In some ways, it was upsetting that even at that age, they are just subject to those forces that really make them feel
Still,
insignificant if they don't have a partner, and they are teenagers.
yeah.
What? And maybe because I went to an all-girls school, so there were no boyfriends for me. I was like, in an all-girls school, and that was fine. But gosh, it just you can see the way that these kind of systems are really working from when you're young to make you feel like, oh, if you're not with someone, there is something wrong with you. You are a problem. And I hated that. And I was glad that I'm able to kind of help them and write this piece that informs them and support them and mentor them in some way, shape, or form. But gosh, it made me realize that this is something bigger than me. And I think the work that people like yourself are doing is so important because there are really forces that are really making young girls feel terrible, pushing them into relationships where they're probably not even happy just so they don't feel bad about themselves. And so I think, yeah, that was obviously huge. I had so many more people following me, like over 110,000 people followed me across my TikTok and my Instagram and my Substack. And that was really wild to have all of these eyes on me suddenly. And I'd written for Vogue before. It wasn't even like a big deal, but I wrote my piece and then I obviously spoke about it on TikTok because that's what I do. Whenever I write something, I always try to make content around it so it gets lots of engagement and blah, blah, blah. But never did I ever imagine this would happen. And obviously, this was picked up on a whole bunch of news channels, news stations, meme pages. I was doing like a bunch of interviews. It was a lot. And I was away in Munich at the time at a conference. And even at the conference, like the press there were trying to talk to me about this article. And it was so, 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 so wild. And then obviously it's like we're in December now. And yesterday, well, today on the Restless Politics, like Anna Wintour was like interviewed and she was talking about the piece. She was like, this was the most read piece across all of our platforms. Da, 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 da. And I was like, what the hell? I literally clipped that up, put it on Instagram immediately and was like, yes, I'll be posting that. But it's so mad. And, loads of people have reached out and, they're really intrigued about where this conversation can go and what I want to talk about next. And yeah, it's been amazing, but I think it's also been difficult because now I kind of feel like I have a little bit of a responsibility. And I feel like whereas on my platforms I was just doing whatever, now I kind of feel like, oh gosh, there are all these people here who kind of are expecting something from me and I don't want to let them down. And also I know how emotional this topic is for people. I've been single for like ever. And so I know how the world makes you feel horrible about yourself and you just want someone to not validate you, but you just want someone to acknowledge you and know that you are a whole person and you are fine and you are good as you are. And I do want to be like supportive of people in that way. But I think it does feel like a huge pressure because there's also just like, well, what are you doing next? And da da da. And I am writing a book at the moment, which is kind of like where this article even came from because I was procrastinating heavy and I was like, oh, let me just bitch this beast. But yeah, I guess it's been insane, so many like celebrities and people know who I am and they'll stop me on the tube and in Soho and it's just like it's been a really wild time for me for sure.
Do you know, oh God, there are so many things that I want to pull out from what you just said. First of all, though, I just want to acknowledge how I don't think people realize how when something like this happens to a person, as has happened to you, and it's
Mm,
essentially that kind of almost overnight fame or, celebrity. And
mm,
and what I just want to acknowledge is that whilst on the one hand it's like, oh my God, it's not just like, yeah, I'm getting 100,000 extra new followers and I
mhm.
got this and there's celebrities messaging me. It's actually there is another side of it, which is this is fucking hard to hold. This
Yeah.
is a lot. So I just want to acknowledge that, well, yes, it's obviously amazing for you in many ways. I also understand that, boy, oh boy, that pressure is immense. And it's really hard for people to understand. And also, what's really hard is that I'm quite sure you've had. I mean, I can't. I'm going to ask you about the haters in a minute, but I'm quite sure that you've
Mm,
had many messages from blokes who probably haven't even read the piece properly, and
yeah.
also probably haven't done the research to realize that it wasn't even you who actually randomly said one day, "Oh, it's embarrassing to have a boyfriend." All
Yeah.
this fucking misunderstanding, which just does my head in. But what I want to talk about this. But one thing I wanted to mention first off the back of what you just said is you are 29. You are 20 years younger than me. Oh my God. Can I just say that is so disturbing? But anywho, moving on. Yeah, you are 20 years younger than me. Yet you said more than once there that you feel the pressure on you as a single woman. And the reason I want to pick up on this is because I have had so many comments on. I recently joined TikTok for my sins,
Oh,
only about
welcome.
literally like, oh my God, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, right? And I've had so many comments from people saying, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, no one cares anymore. Like, no one even thinks anything of single people anymore. And I don't reply to all the comments because, frankly, I don't have time. But I have replied to a few saying, actually, I can assure you that having had a podcast for 4 years and having had multiple emails from single women, the stigma very much still exists. So it was just really interesting and kind of almost validating for me to
Mhm.
hear you say that the age of 29 and the 18-year-olds that you've been hearing from are still feeling that. And this is what is so kind of, on the one hand, this conversation is so sort of exciting to think that things are changing. But on the other hand, you just think, bloody hell, if young girls they still feel it exactly the same.
Yeah.
It's still very much there, which is why these conversations are so important. Now, Chanté, I want to ask about the haters because I mean, I can't relate on the same level, but you won't know this, but I did a piece for the Telegraph just before my book, or just after my book came out in June, actually. And I got so much hate. I got, and like you said, from men and women,
Hmm.
everything from the lady doth protest too much to, oh yeah, who do you think you're kidding, pretending you're happy, to, oh, I wonder how many cats she has, to, oh, she's going to die alone, to,
Oh,
evil, evil,
yeah.
evil. And so, I've had a little taster of what you've gone through, but I want to hear from you. How are you dealing with this and how are you feeling? Because again, I understand. And to be honest with you, like going back to the fact that I'm 20 years older than you, if this had happened to me when I was your age, it would have crushed me because I was not prepared. I was not in a mental state
Mm,
to be able to deal with that much hate. And I think the only reason why those comments in the Telegraph piece, don't get me wrong, they sting, as you will know, they do sting. But I was able to kind of, helicopter up and go, this says way more about you than it does about me, love.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
but I want to know how you are dealing with this and if you are okay, to be quite honest, because it's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. I
Yeah.
think, do you know what? Because I've been online for a long, long time, and I've had obviously I've never experienced virality like this before, but I've had pieces go viral before. So I'm used to kind of the this sort of people trying to drag you and people, calling you names or whatever. I think this was the first time in my life though that I was a little bit scared,
Wow.
just because some of the messages were quite like violent. And like I did actually report it like online to the police, like that online like harassment thing. But I mean they never even did anything. So I might follow that up because I just don't want anything to happen to me, basically. And I think it was like because of the virality and because of how like visible I was and how people would, look at the piece and then look for me and try to figure out who I am or whatever. Like that was really, really, really scary. And it's so funny because obviously I obviously talk a lot about like my experiences as a black woman and like racism in this country. And so I always have back and forth with racists, they'll be like, go back to your country, or whatever, or leave like monkey emojis under my post and like just randomly, just on any day, just because, right? But I'm very used to that sort of like
Oh my
racist
God.
harassment online. But I think this piece was like it was a lot of racist harassment, but then it was a lot of like misogyny, incels, a lot of people being like, yeah, you're gonna die alone, no one's gonna love you. All of that stuff, like really trying to get at me as a person, which was like really, really strange. Like I'd never really experienced
Mm.
anything quite like that before. And I think that was a bit more difficult to deal with because I think there's a certain type of trolling that I've been so accustomed to that this felt like, oh, this is really weird that people are behaving in this way. And even just stuff from other women as well, like calling me ugly, being like, this is why no one wants to be with you, or saying, you look like a beast. And it's really just, yeah, the way people were coming at me, at my image. And for them, I think the big thing was, you wrote this piece because you're bitter and lonely and no one wants you and no one is ever going to want you and you're just jealous. Like that was a bit, and I even made a video just being like, why do people think that I am jealous? I am not quoted in this piece giving my opinion. This was me talking to women in relationships or women just out of relationships, women who were in relationships for years and then like never posted their partners. Like it was about exploring why people did that and also getting a gauge of like where we are at socially, how we feel about these things. And so it was really weird that everyone kind of saw it and then looked at me and then made fun of me. And also, like, it was so funny. I remember posting this on LinkedIn and, it was getting lots of engagement. And someone was like, well, do you have a boyfriend though? And I was thinking, what has that got to do with the price of bread? For real? Like, what
Oh
does it
my
got to do with
God.
anything? But sometimes I feel like people would ask me that because they wanted to see how much respect they would give me. How much am I going to listen to this girl if she has a boyfriend, if she doesn't have a boyfriend? And so that was really, really difficult. But I think, yeah, I don't know, it was definitely a more kind of personal, vitriolic,
Yeah.
violent kind of abuse online, unlike anything I'd kind of ever experienced before. And yeah, I think I then just became the story, and people were really fixated on me and my relationship status, and
Yeah.
if I was single, if I was just bitter and lonely. And I don't know, I think, when people were aggressive towards me, that was more scary. But the whole, oh, you're gonna die alone, you're gonna spend Christmas alone or whatever, like I just kind of felt like, oh, I don't really care. I've always had to deal with that in some way, shape, or form, writing about singleness. But yeah, I think this piece made people angry in
Yeah.
a way that really confused me. I'm like, first of all, this is a piece in a fashion magazine. Like, why are you so upset? You've never read Vogue in your life ever. But
Yeah.
now you feel so confronted by this piece.
Yeah.
And obviously, I know it was the virality of it. But yeah, I think it ignited a rage in some
Yeah.
people that I think I've never experienced before online.
What is so interesting though, and I think you have to remember this, and I'm sure you do, is that when like you use the word rage, right?
Mm,
And I totally hear that. And what is so fascinating is that when a piece like this sparks rage in people and they start freaking out and, becoming threatening and aggressive and plain old mean and nasty,
mm,
it always, always, always is about them and not
yeah,
you. But on the other hand, it's very difficult when people are attacking you personally. Like you say, they were fixating on you because you
yeah,
wrote it. Forget the words, forget the fact that you'd interviewed other women. They're not, you know what I mean? And that's why it's so obvious that people get so upset because it's triggering something in them. It is
mm,
forcing them to look at something in themselves that they don't like.
yeah,
Maybe that's because they're in a miserable relationship. Maybe because that is because they're such a misogynist that they cannot fathom that a woman could be happy without a man. There are so many different reasons, but I think, that's the only way to deal with it, isn't it? Really, is to rationalize it in your head and go, this is not about me. This is about them because it is
mm,
always about them. And, from the little I know about this myself, I have to say that to myself. But anyway, just, sending you so much love and a big fat hug because I get it. And it's really, really hard. And like you say, it
mm.
becomes a little bit scary and you start thinking, should I wear dark glasses and a fucking
Yeah.
baseball cap when I walk out my front
Like,
door?
yeah.
Yeah.
Trust. Yeah,
It's
it really did kind of like people were really fixated on it. They felt very personally attacked
yeah.
by it. Like, just men will be like, well, what are we supposed to do? And women are this, and you're to
Yeah.
this, and blah, blah, blah. And I just kind of felt like, why are you guys so upset?
Yeah.
And I even had like young boys message me and not being aggressive, but just concerned and worried. And I would always take the time to message them and be like, this piece is not about you as an individual, because a lot of it was kind of, these are women talking about their relationships, but also talking about the way that kind of sexism and misogyny is kind of rife, even in romantic relationships, and how that has hindered us from being able to be happy in our relationships because there's this looming cloud of like, is this person going to switch up on me? Like I had a few women talk to me about, men that they're dating start to get like whipped up into right wing, kind of very conservative ideologies that they're seeing online, like the manosphere and stuff. And so
Mm.
I kind of just told, all these young boys, like, you are young, you are impressionable. Make sure that you're curating your social feeds and make sure that you're obviously, engaging in the things that you like, but be aware that some of this content has underlying themes and messages that are designed to make you feel more isolated and more angry.
Yeah.
And don't feed into that. And I would always take the time to message them because they're young, they're
Yeah.
figuring it out too. And they are at a point in their lives where they just need the right guidance and information to help them not get kind of wrapped up into those kind of really harmful ideologies. And I think, when people wanted to have a conversation with me, I was always really receptive and engaged with them. But
Yeah.
then when people just wanted to be nasty, so there's nothing I could do.
Yeah.
And it's tough because I can cuss, right? I can cuss. And so sometimes I'll be like, oh, okay, so you want to be leaving these comments? Let's go on your Instagram and see what you're like. Let's go and make some jokes at your expense. But then it's like, you can't, there's so much energy. You just can't let yourself get like wrapped up in that stuff. It's really just, it's not good. And I could feel myself just becoming an unhappy, miserable person, arguing with these people who were just hell bent on disrespecting me and not trying to see where I was coming from. And so, yeah, that was really, really difficult.
Completely. Good for you for replying. I'm so pleased actually that some young guys reached out to you, and good for you
Mm-hmm.
for responding to them, because ultimately there is a crisis at the moment when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to men, which I actually really want to get your take on. But what young guys need is, like you say, they need a bit of guidance. They need
Mm-hmm.
someone in their life saying exactly the kind of things that you were saying, which, like, you don't need to go down this path, and really make sure that you're curating your social media feeds, because you are going to get fed stuff, blah, 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 and all of this stuff. Now, I'd love for you to speak to the kind of deeper question of how ultimately, I believe, many, not all, but many men need to step up, because I think this is
Mm-hmm.
largely what is going on here, that women are beginning to realize, and again, this is not all men I'm talking about, but I think a significant number are not bringing the value that women now expect, because we don't need men for money, we don't need men for, even to have a baby, well, okay, give sperm, but you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd love to hear your thoughts. And in fact, I want to just quote something that you said on a podcast actually, and I thought this was so, so, so brilliant, because ultimately it actually is up to women to not tolerate shitty behavior, right? And I know that I've put up with stuff in relationships, and I've forgiven stuff that I really don't think I would these days. But so often, I think the problem is you've got men who are not stepping up and who aren't behaving properly. And then you've got women who are letting them get away with it
Mm-hmm.
because they are scared shitless of rejection. But you said
Mm-hmm.
something absolutely genius in a podcast that I listened to. You said, and I quote, "This is how you avoid situationships, heartbreak, chaos, insane TikTok stories, by literally stating what you want and not being afraid of someone leaving." And I've
Mm-hmm.
literally put in capital letters, "This is everything." Because I actually think that sentence that you said right there is
Mm-hmm.
everything. Like, literally, it's about stating what you want and not being afraid of someone leaving.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because I kind of went through the same thing. Like in this, my next Vogue piece coming out, I talk about someone I was dating earlier this year and noticing as soon as things were happening that I didn't like, sitting him down and being like, hey, I'm going to give you an option. Either you can continue doing what you're doing that I don't like, and we can end this here and remain amicable and still be friends, but let's not be romantically involved. Or we can continue dating and you adjust these behaviors. And I never really used to do that before because it was that fear of being abandoned, that fear of not being chosen, that fear of like, oh my God, I don't want this person to leave. And so I'm going to make myself as like small and agreeable as possible. I was like, I can't do that anymore because I'm looking at the life I built for myself and I did it all without you. And now you're here. I don't think I should, have to change myself in order to keep you around. So either you're going to do these things or you're not. And I think that has helped me to like leave a lot of situations. Like I'm giving you the opportunity to end this now. Like I am by no means am I going to be offended. I'm not going to be upset. I will go on with my life as normal. So you don't have to worry about, being mean or whatever. But I am going to give you a choice. Like you can step up in the way I want you to, and we can continue, or you can not, and we can leave it, which is fine. But I think that assertiveness, I didn't really get there until, this point where I was like, oh, actually, I don't really care. I think there was something about just this past year that I've just been like, it's actually fine. You know, I've been single for years and years and years. I can keep being single and I won't die. So why do I need to keep you around?